everyone, and welcome to Good Morning Sri Lanka. Of course, you've joined us on a Friday morning. It is the 11th of July, and it is on a day like today that the world celebrates World Population Day. Now, to talk to us a little bit about how World Population Day works, we've got a guest in the studio. We've got Mr. Alan Sibinala. I hope I got the name correct. We've been practicing for a bit, but he is the head of the United Nations Population Fund here in Sri Lanka. Good morning, and thank you very much for being on the show.
Good morning, Rai. I'm delighted to be here, and happy World Population Day.
Well, thank you. Is it customary for me to say, is that a greeting usually, Happy World Population Day?
Yes, I happen to say that when it's Women's Day, when it's Happiness Day, when it's any kind of day, yes.
So Happy World Population Day it is, and that's what we're going to be talking about on today's show, World Population. Now, every year there is a different theme, as it were, for each of the years, something that you see through. And this year has a very pertinent topic as well. So let's talk about what this year's theme is.
Okay, so this year's theme is every year the United Nations celebrates the World Population Day, as well as there's other commemorative days like World AIDS Day and World Health Day, World Environment Day. So the 11th of July is World Population Day. And this year's theme is an interesting one because it's devoted to investing in young people.
Mm-hmm. Now we'll talk about investing in young people because obviously over the years here in Sri Lanka there has been a lot of investment in young people, but let's go back a little bit. Why is it important that this year, why is the focus on the youth, on empowering youth?
Well, we are just 1 year short of the global deadline that the world community has given, 2015, which marks the end of the Millennium Development Goal period. And before we enter a new phase, which is the Sustainable Development Goal period or phase, the post-2015 agenda, the world has come to the realization, and the United Nations Secretary General and the United Nations as such has come to the realization that it's the biggest ever youngest population that this world has had in its history. There are 1.8 billion people that are between 15 and 24 years old. Half of the world population almost is below the age of 25. So we are a very young population. And as we are going towards evaluating and looking at how much has been achieved within the Millennium Development Goals, we've come to the realization that young people are really at the center of all these development issues, of any kind of challenges that the world of today has because of its sheer weight and magnitude in the world population. It's young people. So it's extremely important to see why do we need to invest in people and in young people, and why is Sri Lanka offering a particularly interesting example?
Exactly. Why? How does it work in a Sri Lankan context? Obviously, we have. I'm sure we don't have the statistics here with us right now, but maybe you could enlighten us on how it works here in Sri Lanka in terms of what you have prepared with this theme, alongside this theme for this year.
Okay, well, you mentioned the statistics. Let me just say, it's 40% of the Sri Lankan population, a bit more than 8 million, that are below the age of 25, right? If you just look again at that same bracket between 15 and 24 years, there are about 16%, which means that out of 100 people, 16 are age 25 to 24. Okay, so that's just a little bit of boring statistics for this morning. But Sri Lanka has had the World Conference on Youth a couple of months ago. A world event whereby a very unique thing happened, and that is that young people from all over the world came together with policymakers, with ministers, senior government officials, civil society organizations, and together they drew up the Colombo Roadmap for youth. And I think it's issues like these, when a country has the courage and the vision to embrace the potential, the issues of young people, and puts it in a declaration, in a political declaration, I think that makes Sri Lanka a very interesting country to celebrate this year's World Population Day in.
Over the years, there have been different themes, and
Yes.
this year, like you said, is a focus on youth. And over the years, there have been different kinds of themes. And of course, let's talk about how, as we spoke of earlier, how important it is in terms of in a global context, but in a Sri Lankan context also. Where do you think we're heading in terms of the youth population?
Okay, so what happens in Sri Lanka right now is that Sri Lanka is right at the middle of a demographic transition that every single country in the world is going through or has gone through. It's the demographic transition whereby mortality is falling, so there are more old people, people live longer, will live healthier, wealthier, hopefully, and at the same time there is a decline in fertility, so that you have still a big proportion of young people, but that is also shrinking. Now, as you still have that important portion of young people, many economies, many countries have benefited from this demographic transition. It's called the demographic window of opportunity, or demographic bonus. Now, if you look at countries like Thailand, like Singapore, like China, European countries, Mexico, Brazil to some extent, countries in Latin America, they've taken advantage of that period of time. It lasts about 40 to 50 years. In Sri Lanka, we've calculated that it takes 42 years, okay? So we are right at
42 years.
42
Okay.
years, that whole period. Now, we are now in 2014, so we still have about 23 years where after that, you see the demographic transition is in a way that it becomes similar to the European or to the northern countries, right? With a large old population, older and older population, and with a fertility that falls to 2 or below replacement levels as it is, which is 2.5 children per woman in any country. So that demographic transition and that demographic bonus is happening right now in Sri Lanka. So what we thought we would do, and what we have started to do for the World Conference on Youth, is to say that Sri Lanka is unique. It's unique by its geographic location, it's unique by its socio-cultural fabric, it has had an interesting, somewhat agitated history of the recent past, but it has tremendously good indicators, social indicators, development indicators. It has, for example, the lowest maternal mortality ratio in all of South Asia. It has a very low child mortality ratio. It has, for example, 600,000 more Sri Lankan women are part of the Sri Lankan population than men. So it has a number of interesting aspects. And so what we wanted to do in the Population Fund and with the Institute of Policy Studies and other partners was to look at what happened. Why is that? Why has Sri Lanka such good social indicators? And we found out that the answer is because Sri Lanka over many decades has invested in young people. It has invested in healthcare, education, and in its women. And hence, you see the result of that. And I want to talk a bit more about that later on. But at the same time, since we are right at the middle, we want to see what are some of the issues that the country now needs to pay attention to, because it wants to be economically competitive, it wants to be fiscally sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and it has very high ambition in terms of macroeconomic development. But the demographic dimensions go hand in hand with the economic development. And young people are right there at the center of this discourse. And I think that makes it extremely interesting and fascinating for any decision maker, policy maker, but also for the young people themselves.
Mm-hmm. So we have about 20 more years, you're saying, to capitalize on this kind of advantage that we have to sustain
the success.
And what kind of work goes into sustaining that kind of success? Obviously, it's not a short-term plan. It's something that you need to think of in the long run. So what kind of work goes into making sure that you can sustain that kind of success?
I think what starts right is that you need to be aware of the phenomenon. You need to have good data that gives you the evidence that this is what happened, why has it happened, where has it happened, what were some of the shortcomings, and so forth. But then you need analysis. You need a consensus whereby the policymaker, the decision maker, thinks that now that this has happened, what are really the issues that are coming out? Are we going to be able to address those? How are we going to address those? That's when you link the numbers to the issues, to the analysis, then to the policy making, and I would even say to the political discourse.
Because it has to come out at some point. It's not just about the process.
And what the Colombo Declaration on Youth and the World Conference on Youth has given a marvelous example is that you engage young people into this whole process. And I think, again, like Sri Lanka has done in its healthcare system, in its education system, Sri Lanka can show the way. It can give a good example of sound policies mixed with involving of young people, getting a broad-based discussion and consensus on the issue, and then addressing them and prioritizing and budgeting and planning.
And then seeing it through, which is what's important. So it's quite an interesting conversation we're having here today, of course in line with World Population Day, which is today, the 11th of July. We have more conversation on the other side of this quick break. Make sure you stay with us.